Hurricane Beryl is the strongest and most destructive to ever occur so early in the Atlantic Ocean. It hit the Caribbean and is hitting Mexico right now. It has reached winds of over 250 km per hour and has so far caused around 10 deaths in Jamaica and Grenada, but unfortunately the numbers could rise. In short, we had never seen such an intense hurricane of the maximum category at the beginning of the hurricane season. It broke every record. In this video, we'll see why such a phenomenon occurred so violently and so early in the year, how it has evolved so far, and what the possible scenarios are. On July 2nd, the U.S. government's National Hurricane Center announced that Hurricane Beryl would bring life-threatening storms to Jamaica over the following day. And so it was. Within a few hours from its forming, Beryl reached Category 5, which is the maximum level of intensity on the Saffir-Simpson scale. To be clear, a Category 5 hurricane has winds exceeding 250 km per hour, capable of destroying entire buildings, uprooting trees, injuring or even killing people and livestock. It's for this reason that the National Hurricane Center describes them as catastrophic events. In the Atlantic area, events of this type, hurricanes and tropical storms, are not rare. They occur every year with various strength. But the exceptional nature of Beryl lies in the fact that it is the earliest hurricane ever seen in this area since 1851, the first year of which we have information. Before Beryl, the only hurricane that had reached Category 5 in July was Emily in 2005, which reached the maximum category on July 17th. But why is it so strange that such a hurricane occurs at the beginning of July? It is because in the Atlantic, the hurricane season runs from June to November, but the heart of the season is in the months of August, September, and October. It is here that we expect the strongest hurricanes. We have recorded 39 so far in these months, while the only hurricanes of Category 5 which happened already in July were Beryl and Emily. But how did it happen? To understand this, let's first see what meteorological conditions lead to the formation of hurricanes, which is the name used for tropical cyclones that occur in the Atlantic Ocean. They are created in the tropical belt, where they find the ideal atmospheric conditions. Yes, because these phenomena feed on warm and humid air that forms above the warm waters of the oceans near the equator, where the sea temperature reaches 25 to 26 degrees on the surface. The more warm water there is at the surface and the higher its temperature, the more energy there will be to fuel a hurricane. The hot water that evaporates turns into water vapor, which rises upwards until it condenses when it reaches lower temperatures. By doing so, it leaves a sort of vacuum inside which attracts cold air from the surrounding areas. This generates strong winds which in turn favor evaporation and condensation. This mechanism self-amplifies as long as the water on the sea surface remains warm. Hurricane Beryl was so early due to particularly high temperatures in the waters of the tropical Atlantic. In fact, the temperature at the time of Beryl's formation was 304 degrees centigrade above average, thus reaching temperatures at the beginning of July that usually occur in August and September, the most intense months for hurricanes. There are essentially two reasons for this phenomenon. The first is global warming, which, among other things, increases the surface temperature of the oceans. And as we said, the warm water of the seas is precisely the fuse that causes hurricanes to explode. What made the situation worse was the decrease of El Niño, a periodic meteorological phenomenon that lasted until the end of spring and has now practically disappeared. Explaining everything in detail is complicated, but what we are interested in knowing is that the decrease of El Niño has prevented the so-called wind shear from happening. The wind shear has the effect of cutting hurricanes, inhibiting their formation or growth, and therefore its absence could have favored the formation of Beryl. In the night between Monday 1st and Tuesday the 2nd July, Beryl, as we have said, reached Category 5. It thus managed to beat not only the earliness record by over 2 weeks, but also reached a peak of 265 kilometers per hour, thus becoming the fastest Atlantic hurricane in July. What was also surprising was the speed with which it developed. It was Friday the 28th when the National Hurricane Center reported a tropical depression, a less intense phenomenon with thunderstorms occurring around 50-60-kilometer timetables. But 6 hours later, the depression had already turned into a tropical storm, a slightly more intense phenomenon with winds of up to 120 kilometers per hour. It only took 1 day for the storm to become a hurricane. In 48 hours, Beryl reached Category 4, and after more 48 hours, it broke every July record, moving to Category 5 and becoming devastating. The hurricane devastated first the southeast of the Caribbean and then Jamaica, leading to 9 confirmed deaths, a number that could increase in the next few days. However, its intensity has already dropped and has reached Category 3, with winds of up to 180 kilometers per hour. One of the reasons for this drop is that when a hurricane touches the mainland, it loses intensity, because as we have said, it feeds on warm waters and humid air which can't be found on land. As I'm speaking, Beryl, according to data from the National Hurricane Center, has already begun to hit Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Even though the hurricane has decreased in intensity, the region is on high alert. Category 3 still means devastating damage and danger of death, with very intense winds, torrential rains, and strong storm surges on the coasts. The forecasts of the National Hurricane Center currently tell us that the hurricane will lose strength as it crosses the Yucatan. As long as it remains above the land, it will weaken further until it becomes a tropical storm, which is a less violent phenomenon, but is still destructive with winds of up to 120 kilometers per hour. The forecasts then indicate a cone of possible trajectories directed towards northern Mexico and Texas in the next few days. To get there, Beryl will once again pass over water, those of the Gulf of Mexico, which could strengthen it again. It would then arrive on the coast with the force of a hurricane and then weaken again until it gradually dies in the Texan hinterland around Wednesday. In short, Hurricane Beryl shows us how powerful and destructive nature can be, but it also shows us how dangerous global warming is. According to meteorologists, Beryl's early arrival tells us that this hurricane season will be particularly violent, with a high number of very intense events. This is an effect of climate change, which has as its consequence the increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme meteorological phenomena, including hurricanes. Events that today are considered rare, such as Beryl, drought, floods, will increasingly become normal. This is why it is very important to fight climate change as quickly as possible. Well, girls and boys, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it gave you some interesting food for thought. See you in the next video, always here on Geopop, Everyday Science.